Some stories begin with love. Some begin with loss. And some begin the moment everything falls apart. This is Scarlett After Dark. Scarlett After Dark.
I'm Scarlett Stone. This is The Unraveling, a story about a secret affair, a dissolving marriage, and what it cost to want the wrong man. Let's get into it. Chapter 8, My Father's Wounds. Let me tell you about my father. He was a verbally and physically abusive man. Verbal toward everyone in the house, my mother, my sisters, anyone within range of his displeasure. Physical mainly toward me. But before I tell you what he did, let me tell you what he looked like, because it matters. He was 5'9", stocky and strong, with black hair that had gone mostly gray by the time I was old enough to really look at him. Chestnut brown eyes, olive skin. He had aged well, handsome in that particular way of men who know it and have always known it. He was charming and funny, goofy even, with a sick sense of humor that could make a whole room collapse. He smoked. We begged him to stop. For years we begged him. And he loved whiskey. 2 fingers, always. The smoking was what did him in eventually, but that comes later. The point is, he was magnetic. That was the thing nobody tells you about abusive people. They are so often the most magnetic person in any room. The charm and the cruelty lived in the same body, drew from the same source, and you loved him for one and survived the other, and spent the rest of your life trying to reconcile how both could be true at once. I was the youngest of 3 girls, Courtney the eldest, then Angelica, then me, and the rebellious one, which in his house was the most dangerous thing to be. Courtney was 3.5 years older than me, the good student, the one who knew how to stay out of his way. She left for college my freshman year of high school, precisely when things got the worst. I don't know how much she knew. We didn't talk about it then. We barely talked about it ever. Saturday mornings he'd wake us at 6 to clean. Not a suggestion, a command, timed and inspected. He'd come home from work and run a cloth along the surfaces, checking for dust, for evidence of laziness, for any proof that we hadn't performed the house to his standard. I was never quite good enough at it. I was never quite good enough at anything by his measure. He had rules, a curfew, 10, sometimes 11, that I almost always broke, because being home felt like punishment and being out felt like breathing. He forbade us from going out in the snow, which in our climate was approximately half the year, even though we grew up knowing how to drive in it, because control was the point, not safety. Control was always the point. When I defied him, and I defied him often, because the alternative was to disappear into myself, and I have never been able to do that, I felt his wrath. Not anger, wrath. The kind that doesn't scale to the offense, that arrives already at its maximum, that has been building since something happened long before you were born, and you just happened to be standing there. The real violence started when I was 13, old enough to push back, old enough to make him feel challenged. He threw me against walls. He put his hands around my throat. There were moments that could have ended differently than they did, and I have thought about that more times than I can count. What I understood, even then, was that he didn't know what to do with me. My sisters were different. Quieter, more manageable, better at performing compliance. I was spirited in a way that confused and threatened him. I had a laugh that filled rooms, and an energy that went everywhere, and a refusal to be contained that he experienced as a personal attack. He couldn't celebrate it. He could only try to break it. He couldn't, but he left marks. The cycle went like this: the abuse, and then the morning after. The money pressed into my hand. Why don't you go buy yourself something nice? As if a purchase could reset the ledger. As if I'd forget. I never forgot. What I learned instead was a particular grammar of love. That it comes and goes. That it has to be earned and can be revoked. That the people who are supposed to give it to you freely will instead make you work for it and then withhold it anyway. That love looks like someone who could hurt you, and sometimes does, and then offers you something afterward to make it even. I carried this out of that house and into the world, and I didn't know I was carrying it for a very long time. In high school, I fought. Not figuratively, actually fought. Physical altercations, because I would not be bullied. Not at home, not at school, not anywhere. The anger my father deposited in me had to go somewhere, and for a while it went there, into my fists, into the particular fury of a girl who has been pushed too many times and has decided she is done being pushed. I was tough because I had to be. Tough was the thing that kept me safe when safety wasn't guaranteed at home. And then I got out. College, freedom. The first time in my life I could be exactly who I was without anyone checking for dust or setting a curfew or throwing me against a wall for laughing too loud. I was alive in a way I had never been allowed to be. I was also, if I'm honest, looking for something I didn't have a name for yet. I wasn't reckless exactly. I was searching. I had relationships, connections, experiences that felt meaningful in the moment and left me emptier than I expected afterward. Not because I regret any of it. I was young and free and figuring out who I was, and that's what you do. But underneath the freedom was a young woman who desperately needed the love of her father and had never gotten it. And that need doesn't announce itself. It just shapes the choices you make and the things you reach for and the way you feel when someone chooses you and when they don't. When they didn't, it landed harder than it should have, because what it confirmed at the cellular level, where my father's voice still lived, was the old verdict. Not enough. Wanted but not chosen. Desired but not kept. At 28, my sister Angelica pleaded with me to try, to reach back toward him. I didn't want to. The wall I'd built was thick, and it had kept me safe, and I didn't see the point. But I did it. We talked. Not a full reckoning, not the kind of conversation that erases everything, but something real. We were two people who didn't fully understand each other, and possibly never would, and we both said sorry. And something shifted. From that moment forward, I had the father I had always wanted. Not the one I'd grown up with, that man was gone, but a new version, one who showed up, who was proud of me, who was supportive in the ways that mattered. I got to have that for a while. We all did. My sisters, our husbands, the grandchildren he adored. He spent his last year sleeping in his leather recliner because lying flat made it too hard to breathe. The oxygen machine hummed in the other room. On the dark wood side table beside him, pill bottles and a whiskey glass, 2 fingers high. A last request. He loved whiskey. he obliged. He went at Thanksgiving, surrounded by everyone who loved him, which felt like the right way for a man to go. Bittersweet doesn't quite cover it. He had given me so many scars, and I loved him so completely anyway. And grief doesn't untangle those two things. It just holds them both at once. We took turns sitting with him through those last hours, exhausted and present, keeping vigil the way families do. At some point, I finally went into another room to sleep for a little while. He died when I was in the other room. I have thought about that more times than I can count. Not with guilt exactly. I know he knew I was there. I know he knew I loved him. But there is something about it that feels like the summary of us. The story of my whole life with him in one quiet moment. Almost. Almost there. Almost enough time. Almost beside him when it mattered most. I had done the work. I had forgiven the unforgivable. I had closed the wound, or thought I had. I chose myself. I chose stability. I ended up in a long-term relationship that was mostly happy, that produced 2 children I love with everything I have, that had real friendship and real warmth, even if it lacked the one thing I most needed. For years, the pattern stayed quiet. The wound stayed sealed. And then it found David Rose. Here is what I know now that I didn't know then. David has father wounds too. I would find this out later, through the phone call, through the things he disclosed carefully and strategically, through reading between the lines of a man who cheats incessantly and runs hot and cold and keeps everyone at arm's length, including, probably, himself. His father did to him some version of what mine did to me, withheld, damaged, left marks. And so we found each other, 2 people carrying the same wound in different bodies, drawn together by a force neither of us fully understood and neither of us could control. My astrologer told me we had lived 2 past lives together. In one, I wronged him. In the other, he wronged me. 3rd time's a charm, and here we are. I choose to believe this not because I'm naive, but because there is no other reasonable explanation for the grip this man has had on me for 6 years. The chemistry alone doesn't account for it. The sex doesn't account for it. Something older and deeper recognized something in him before I consciously knew what I was looking at. But here is the harder truth, the one I sit with at 3 a.m. in dark houses in strange cities. When I look at David Rose, I am looking at a version of my father. The aloofness is my father's aloofness. The hot and cold is my father's approval and withdrawal. The way he'd vanish and then reappear, just enough to keep me reaching, never enough to let me rest, is the same cycle I grew up inside. My nervous system recognized it before my brain did. This is familiar. This is the shape of love. Not because it's right, because it's the shape I was handed first. Make him love you. Make him stay. Prove you're worth it. I know this. I have said it out loud in therapy and to friends and now on this page. The knowing has not made it stop. That's the thing about wounds that go all the way back. They don't respond to logic. They respond the same way they always have because the part of you that carries them is not the rational part. It's the 13-year-old being thrown against a wall who just wants her father to look at her and mean it. I am not 13 years old. I have built a life and a career and a self that my father's voice cannot touch on most days. I have walked through the world with my head up and my volume turned all the way up and my refusal intact. And I have spent 6 years trying to get a man who looks like my father, emotionally, not physically, though the irony of him being older and withholding is not lost on me, to choose me. Except that's not entirely true. It wasn't until much later, when I was deep in the dissection, scrounging the internet for old photos of David, turning the whole thing over looking for answers, that the physical parallel hit me too. The dark, wavy hair in the younger photos, the chestnut brown eyes, the olive skin, the beard scruff. God, I love David with a beard. I need to say that somewhere, and this is as good a place as any. The charm with the mean streak running underneath it. The way he could make a room laugh and make one person feel invisible at the same time. My father was better looking, taller, a different build entirely. But the eyes, the lips, the particular shape of a man who is magnetic and withholding in equal measure. Enough that when I finally saw it, I had to put my phone down and sit with it for a long time. It wasn't just emotional. It never is. And I had done the work once. I had forgiven the unforgivable, found my way back to my actual father, gotten the ending I deserved. I knew it was possible. I knew wounds could close. What I didn't know was that I would walk straight into the same dynamic again with a man who would not give me that ending, who could not, who, unlike my father, never found his way to the other side of it. My father came back to me. David Rose never will. That might be the most painful sentence in this book. Chapter 9. Solitude Breeds Desire. I started a new consulting gig in the city to fill the time before the San Francisco project kicked off. Some days I drove in, others I took the train. Either way, the commute gave me time to be with my thoughts. Whether that was a good thing or a bad one is debatable. On the train, my fingers would find him without my permission, scrolling through whatever traces of David Rose the internet would give me. Instagram, LinkedIn, anything public, anything recent, anything that told me he was still out there and still breathing and still, on some level, aware that I existed. Driving was better. When I was behind the wheel, I couldn't let my fingers do the walking. I just had to sit with the thoughts instead of feeding them, which was its own particular kind of discipline. The people at the company were sharp and warm, and going into that office every day did something good for me. The noise, the pace, the particular anonymity of moving through crowds of people who had somewhere to be. It fed something that had gone hungry. I told myself I was fine. I was fine, mostly, until bath time. Every night I'd run a bath, soft music in the background, bubbles covering all the right places, and lie back and let the day dissolve. And every night, without fail, David came back. I'd close my eyes and there he was. Not the version of him that blocked and unblocked me. Not the man who sent a thumbs up and called it communication. The other one. The one on the rooftop in the marina with the city spread out behind him. The one whose hands I had placed over my body and held there. The one whose sounds told me everything I needed to know. Just memories. That's all I had left. But they were hot and specific, and I wanted them again so badly, it was its own kind of ache. I never touched myself in the bath. That happened every morning instead. After my workout, in my closet, in front of the full-length mirror. Endorphins will do that to you. At least they do to me. They make me intensely sexual, wound up and alive in a way that needs somewhere to go. I'd stand there in the mirror and think about him, every time. It was the closest thing I had to him, and I used it shamelessly, and I'm not sorry about it. My libido has always been on fire, And even now, years later, living out of suitcases and sleeping in other people's houses, it still is. And I still think about him when it matters most. On Instagram, I monitored him the way you monitor something you're pretending not to monitor. He'd look at some of my stories, not all of them. The ones he skipped felt like a verdict. I knew how irrational this was. I couldn't stop. It was February. There were rumblings of a pandemic. Something happening overseas, something that might or might not become our problem. In the office, we ignored it the way you ignore something you don't want to be true. And then it was early March, and there was no ignoring it anymore. We packed up our things from that dark, musky, very old New York office building and went home. I drove in that last day. James didn't want me taking a chance on the train, and neither did I. I cleared my wall of postcards, packed up the pages pinned around my project, loaded everything into bags, and made the last walk to the car. I had never seen New York that quiet. People had been leaving for days before we did. The city emptying out in that particular way of a place that knows something is coming and is trying to get ahead of it. But I hadn't fully registered it until that walk. The streets were not New York streets anymore. The noise was gone. The particular electricity of 8 million people moving through the same space at the same time, gone. Just pavement and silence and the echo of my own footsteps. It was eerie in a way I don't have a better word for. Like the city was holding its breath. I loaded the car and drove home to Westchester. I wanted badly to get back to San Francisco. The universe had other plans. In early March of 2020, the world stopped. People were dying, and no one fully understood what they were dying of or how to slow it down. Industries shut down. Streets went quiet. The air changed. It was eerie in the way that only a true collective emergency can be eerie. The sudden, total absence of normal life, replaced by nothing. My job went remote. So did James's. The two people who had recently sat across from a therapist and been told, essentially, that their marriage was over, were now locked in a house together with nowhere to go and no timeline for when that might change. We were not unique in this. Couples all over the world were suddenly confronting each other with no buffer, no exit, no excuse to be elsewhere. But knowing you're not alone in something doesn't make the something easier. James and I moved around each other carefully, like people sharing a space they've both agreed not to acknowledge is too small. We played house the way you play house when there's nothing else to do. Cooking together, cleaning, watching things on the couch, making the occasional run to Trader Joe's to stock up on wine because wine was the only thing that made the walls feel slightly further apart. We were cordial. We were civil. Two people performing domesticity in a house that had already been quietly declared over, with nowhere to go and no timeline for when that might change. 2 months of this. Small rooms, careful distance, the particular exhaustion of being trapped in close proximity to someone you've already left in your heart. And into that sealed, airless domestic situation came David Rose, via Instagram DM, with that elusive wave of a hand that led to asking if I'd touched myself today. I had, as it happened. What followed over those lockdown months was the most intensely charged sexting I've ever experienced. Not the clumsy, transactional kind, The real thing, the kind that makes your body respond before your brain catches up. Photos, words, heat. It would start with something simple. Have you touched yourself today? And I'd write back that of course I had, that I'd thought of him the entire time. He'd reply, so yum, babe. I want to go down on you so bad. My whole body would respond to that. It was intimate in its way, even through a screen, even knowing what I knew about him. Maybe especially because of that. The wanting had nowhere else to go, so it went there, into our phones, into the blue light of a pandemic night, while my almost ex-husband slept down the hall and the world outside had gone completely silent. There was one night in particular that I think about. It was April 2020, the height of it. The world outside genuinely terrifying, the news unrelenting, nobody knowing anything. A friend had come to stay with us, which meant James had to sleep in the bed with me for the first time in a long time. He was out within minutes, the way he always slept, deep and snoring and completely unreachable. I lay there in the dark next to my husband, listening to the silence outside our window, and my phone lit up. David, show me your wet fingers. I stared at the ceiling for a moment, James breathing next to me, my friend down the hall, the world ending outside. And David rose, somewhere in San Francisco, wanting me. I obliged, quietly, under the covers, with my husband asleep 6 inches away. I am not proud of this. I am also not going to pretend it didn't happen, because it did, and because the absurdity of it, the specific, darkly comedic absurdity of that moment, captures something true about where I was and what I had become. A woman in the middle of a global catastrophe, in a bed with a man she was leaving, sending photographs to a man who would ghost her 2 months later. The wanting had nowhere else to go, so it went there. My San Francisco project was pushed indefinitely. The industry was paralyzed, waiting to understand what safety could even look like. By mid-May, there was enough PPE and enough protocol that things could begin to cautiously restart. Before I flew out, I messaged David. I told him I was coming to town, acknowledged the obvious. There was a pandemic. People were still getting sick. If he didn't want to meet up, I completely understood. He wrote back, "Text me when you're here." By mid-June, I was on a plane to San Francisco. I was anxious in a way I hadn't anticipated. I had wanted him for so long, he had started to feel like a stranger, someone I knew intimately in theory and hadn't actually touched in months. Someone who existed mostly in the blue light of a phone screen and the steam of a late-night bath. The plane couldn't get there fast enough. Nothing else mattered to me. Not the job, not James, not the careful life I was supposedly still living. I was willing to ruin myself over this man if he would have let me. I landed. The company had arranged a small apartment that sat back off the street behind another home. Cozy and charming in that particular San Francisco way. White couch, African artifact rugs warm underfoot, wood floors, a queen bed and an old bathroom that had, crucially, a tub. The kitchen was barely a kitchen, almost no cupboards, a wood table where I laid out all my non-perishable groceries like I was setting up camp. No AC, which in June in the city is usually fine. I walked in, set my bags down, looked around at this small, bright space that was mine for the next few months, and felt something loosen in my chest. I lit a joint and sat on the white couch and smoked it slowly. For the first time in months, I could breathe. Not metaphorically, actually breathe, deep and full, without the walls of the Westchester house pressing in, or James moving through rooms like a weather system I had to track. Just me and the quiet and the particular relief of finally being somewhere I had been trying to get to for a very long time. The weed helped. It always helped with David. Put just enough distance between me and the obsession that I could exist in a room without him for 5 minutes. I should probably still be smoking it, honestly. I messaged him. "I'm here, smoking a joint." "Yay." "Great," he wrote. "Let's talk tomorrow." "Sounds good," I wrote back. Tomorrow came. Nothing. The streets of San Francisco were quiet. Not New York quiet, not that particular held breath emptiness, but quieter than they should have been, the city moving at half speed, tentative. As the days passed, I watched them slowly come back to life. More people, more noise, the cautious resumption of something that resembled normal. We had a vaccine now. We had social distancing, which, I'll be honest, I still wish people took more seriously. Personal space is a gift. But life was less terrifying than it had been, and you could feel the city remembering itself, block by block, day by day. I kept myself busy with work, meetings, the project, colleagues I'd grab an occasional outdoor drink with. I smoked enough weed to keep the David thoughts at a manageable volume. Mostly it worked. The days passed. A week went by without a word from him. Then another. I stewed, refreshed, checked. After about a month of silence, I did what any self-respecting woman who had been sending intimate photos to a man who now couldn't be bothered to respond would do. I unfollowed him. Blocked him, maybe. I was furious and humiliated, and I wanted him to feel the absence the way I was feeling it. Whether he noticed, I'll never know. New chapters of The Unraveling drop every Monday. We all have secrets. Some we never say out loud. If you have a story that lives in the dark, obsession, betrayal, heartbreak, desire, reinvention, I want to hear it. Send me an email at lipservice68@gmail.com or find me on YouTube at Scarlett After Dark Official. Your secrets are